Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is my great pleasure to invite to my podcast, Leadership at the Edge of AI, Abhijit Bhaduri. Abhijit was the Chief Learning Officer at Microsoft globally. Before that, he has held roles either being a consultant and coaching executives and helping them to create talent and performance cultures, or even he's been the chief learning officer of the conglomerate IT company in India called Wipro. A very warm welcome to you, Abhijit. How are you today?
Very good. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
You've written a lot of books, and I know that your latest book is also going to be about this, the human side of transformation. There have been various ways in which us as humans and us as practitioners inside organizations get impacted. This change seems to be, with the AI disruption, much faster, much more fundamental, foundational in nature, right? You've been writing about human change and human behavior and performance cultures for well over 3 decades. What did you find as you write your seventh book, I know, is different about the change this time around?
A couple of things which are different, Shivangi. One is that the speed of change of technology historically has been spaced out. So if you look at, let's say, 3G to 4G, 4G to 5G, um, each of these changes has been done over a span of about a decade. So the technology gets introduced, then some people change, some of them adapt, some don't, and then the governments come in. So this time, one of the things that's happening is the development of tech, the speed of development is absolutely stunning because, it's like, AI is driving up the speed of change dramatically. So that's one part of what's happening. I think what is happening is it's like the gap between the human side of change and the tech side of change is actually becoming larger and larger. And I think a lot of times the leaders get obsessed with the tech side of the change that, okay, this is the latest technology that we can bring in, which is something they need to be aware of. There is no doubt about that. But I think, one thing is to develop technology, the other is to get that technology to become a part of our lives. So adoption is a very different challenge. So tech is a different challenge, and there is the psychological adoption, which tells us that I trust the technology, I can afford the technology, I think it's making a difference to me. That is the element which I think needs to be in focus. The last bit I would say is we think about how the individual's identity is getting shaped by the technology and the changes that it's driving. So, for example, if I'm a copywriter and somebody looks at my experience of, let's say, I have been writing copy for 20 years, and somebody tells me that there is a young trainee who can use AI to write copy just as good as you. What it does is, it doesn't sort of just damage my self-worth about my skills, etc. It's all of that, but it changes the way I look at myself. And I wonder, am I just more expensive or am I more experienced? So this is one time where this time lag is really creating that shift.
Very much so. So, this almost crisis of significance and meaning that you're alluding to, which has been created large scale. I know that some organizations are probably adopting this, much faster than other organizations. If you happen to work in the tech sector, probably you're getting impacted, far more than maybe a more traditional industrial sector. Leaders in these organizations, you work with various kinds, the organizations which are getting it right or better, what are the leaders in these organizations doing differently?
I think they're balancing the amount of effort that goes into addressing the tech side of adoption. How do you integrate tech, which could mean data cleanup, which could mean integrating the old system into the new. It also means changing the roles, changing the specific tasks. So there is a lot of conversation about jobs getting disrupted, but I really think that technology, in some ways, works at the level of tasks skill, and the activities that people do. So when you
Mm.
look at that, that is a massive part of what the ones who are doing it right are doing it well. They are focusing on each of the tasks. What kind of skills does it need? What kind of activities and impact would it create? And then sort of helping the person to adapt to it, because most of the times the experienced person brings in a tremendous amount of experience, judgment. They bring in their relationships. They bring in the way that they would approach the work differently. And every profession has that. So how do you leverage that? Whereas when you think about what's happening at the entry level, is many of those entry level jobs are disappearing because tech can do some of it. So how do you get the entry level people's roles to be different? How do you move them up in the more complex tasks? How do you upskill the people to do that? That I think is the real big possibility.
Yeah, and a big question mark, right? I mean, these questions are being asked. I don't know if the answers are being given or if anybody has again deployed some of these answers at a large scale. I remember meeting you at the Tech Week in San Francisco, and you spoke about Scarf. You spoke about the idea of human motivation linked to status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. Now, I'm just wondering again, that is a very interesting lens. It's something that I have been, using quite effectively, I would say, when I work with my coaches who are executives trying to bring about, changing the way people work. But what we
Mhm.
keep hearing in the media is job loss. Scary statistics like 4 out of 5 jobs will probably be reshaped. Um, and and then the generational discrepancy, as you mentioned, the younger generation coming into the workplace, not having that sort of certainty, not maybe having a role or feeling that sense of value or contribution. So, what if I am a young person listening, to this? What do you think should be my stance? What should I do if I'm aware that probably a machine can do what I can do better? What should I do then?
So one of the most common jobs which people are now hiring for is, what they call forward deployed product manager. So, when you look at that, it really is a very fancy term to describe somebody who is very strong in complex problem solving. What it means is, you not only are comfortable working with an LLM, you are also comfortable orchestrating different things. You can actually decide to prioritize. You are great at writing prompts, and you can you are more productive because you can leverage that to write better quality flawless code, etc., all of that. So I think that's where the entry level jobs are going. So that's what people mean when they are saying forward deployed product manager. That's really what it means. What I would also say is, I think the ability for the person to work with a diverse set of human beings, to be able to understand that I think is another huge skill which is coming up. How do you convey your ideas in a more powerful way? How do you work with people who are very different from you? I mean, those are skills which have always been precious, and it's becoming more powerful and more sought after. Just as we are looking at the technological skills, it's also these aspects which are becoming important for younger people.
Mhm. Thank you, Abhijit. You've taught, coached, and built talent management systems across various organizations and across the years, right? Would you be able to share maybe a couple of counterintuitive insights as you go about that work? I imagine, which is, and maybe that's accelerated too, but typically the culture development work used to be a couple of years, I don't know what are the sort of, assignments that you get into now. And could you share maybe some, as I said, counterintuitive, something which is not probably that obvious?
Well, thanks. So I think you referred to when I talked about the scarf model, status, certainty, etc. All of that. That's David Rock's very pioneering work, and that's something which is something that we can always look at. See, I think one of the questions organizations need to think about is that work. is not just about earning money. A lot of times you'll hear this conversation that when all work gets sort of done by machines, then we can just sit back and relax. We have nothing to, we don't need to wake up in the morning to go to work. The people who say this are missing the entire aspect that work is a lot more than just money. Work gives us multiple things. Work gives us predictability. So during COVID, for example, a lot of people would miss the morning commute. While we complain about it, people would actually get out of the house, drive around their block, and come back and park the car and then start the work again, because the commute is a way to uh, prepare the transition from your home identity to work identity. Also, this is also the time when the way of working, for example, you are looking at people bringing the office into home. And that has never happened. I mean, as today technology makes it possible for us to do that, it's changing multiple things. It's changing how we relate to our colleagues, for example. You can certainly get work done more efficiently, but human relationships are never built on efficiency. It's built on inefficiency, when you talk about something other than the task. And today on a Zoom call, it's rather difficult to have a spontaneous conversation when I say that, okay, I'm going to talk to you from 10 to 10:15, to talk about everything other than work. That becomes very artificially structured. And human beings don't really understand that. We build our relationships through empathy, and empathy is built when the behavior that you are demonstrating, what's happening in your neural circuitry that fires my mirror neurons, and we resonate. That builds empathy, and that does not happen on a Zoom call, because think about it. You have a team meeting on a Zoom call. Some people don't switch on the camera, some people don't. Just imagine what it would be like if I just turned this camera off and only you were there. This is what it would look like. You would just be talking to this black box, and it would be so weird because you have no idea what I'm doing at this point. So this is what happens when people get onto building relationships online. It doesn't work. Because human beings build relationships in proximity. You build trust because you observe not just what you're saying, but also the body language. It's all of that. So the processes that build culture have changed drastically. And you have to now recreate work in a very different context. Behavior changes context. The way that you behave, in a rock concert is very different from the way that you would behave in a hospital. So, the context changes our responses. So, the more you are able to understand that, the more you are able to actually specify how we can leverage it.
Very well said, Abhijit. What is your advice to leaders who are struggling with this, right? Because there are economic and commercial imperatives which will not allow them maybe to bring, an entire workforce like it was 5 years or 10 years back. Work is efficient, maybe not effective, and they do need lesser and lesser people, and they deploy more and more technology, right? So there are all of these constraints under which leaders are operating. And it is very true. I have the same experience. Just because you say, okay, 15 minutes networking time before a team meeting, it doesn't necessarily create that kind of social glue that happens when people just naturally meet over a coffee, or the what we used to call the water cooler conversations, right? It's very challenging to recreate all of that. And we also saw after COVID, there was what was we called vengeance travel, right? Like everybody really wanted to travel. Similarly, there's a lot. By the way, in Switzerland, there are some organizations which have gone away really in the opposite direction. They said we want people 100% back at work. They are few and far between, but they have made that choice, and people maybe were reluctant. But I think it's very easy to go back to that whole idea. Okay, you complain about the commute, but you actually like to be at work. Most human beings actually like that. But if that is not a possibility, what do you advise leaders in terms of recreating that that sense of connection between colleagues, which then usually leads to work becoming more effective because people go out of their way, they go beyond their job descriptions and their racy charts, whatever they might be. What do leaders do, or what should leaders do?
One of the ways to think about it is that if we can work from home, which is how we learned how to do it really effectively during COVID. Everybody learned that, and that's fresh in our mind. So we can sort of do some of that. Um, but it's also then important to say, if you can do most of the work, then what do you do in the office? So the idea is not to replicate, the old office in this format again, because work has changed. If you are bringing work out of the office into the home, what do you do with that vacuum? The vacuum potentially could be used for building relationships. So, I would sort of really double down on making the workplace all about relationship building rather than work transactions. So don't just do the same work that you could do on email or on a call like this. Use the office to really get people to build trust with each other, to deepen their working bonds with each other. And that actually shows up far dramatically, when people trust each other's intentions, decisions move faster. You are able to get greater buy-in with much less effort, instead of people actually saying, okay, raise your hand on Zoom, and you kind of say yes, no, and then people go back to doing what they were doing. That's a very inefficient way of working. And a lot of times, I think, people who design technology have very little understanding of how human beings work. This is the classical challenge that traditional economics assumed. Human beings are rational, they know what's good for them, and they'll make all the choices. Actually, they aren't. We don't decide on rationality. I mean, there is enough of research which talks about how human beings find it so hard to do this. So how do you build that? I think those are some of the pieces that we have to really rethink our assumptions.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I have the privilege with working with management teams and having these offsite meetings, right? So facilitating whatever, rethink of the vision or strategic objectives and taking this time away in the mountains or wherever 2 to 3 days. The frequency of those has diminished for sure. I think even the number of organizations that invest in those has reduced over time, or even things like management development programs, etc. There is much more this tendency, why fly everybody, just let's do online events and let's do them multiple times, etc. So there is that imperative inside organizations. When you speak with leaders, what are the kind of conversations they are ready to share with you in private? Like, what are the fears they share with you which they will never go and actually speak for whatever fears they might have about PR? What kind of fears do you hear from?
Most of them worry about culture. That's because that's one of the things that really needs human beings to be in one place. People talk about lack of skills, and that's a major challenge for every organization that I work with. Um, and the reason for that is, people sort of tend to um, not understand. A lot of the leaders say that we are using, Zoom calls to build soft skills. It's just a complete waste of time. Complete waste of time. You cannot build, people related skills, anything which involves working with each other. You cannot build those skills on a Zoom call. It just doesn't work. What you can do on Zoom calls, can you teach me how to run, let's say, Excel? Yes, you can. Can you teach me how to code on online? Yes, you can. Can I do self study on that? Yes, I can. Can you teach me how to give feedback? No, you can't. Can you teach me how to use storytelling to really teach a sales team how to win a deal? No, you can't. So anything which involves another human being's response cannot be done on Zoom. Cannot. So that's something that people struggle with. But they'd like to use the same context and say, if it works for teaching somebody Excel, why does it not work when you want to teach them how to be a better leader?
I
Because leadership is not done on Zoom.
Well, I've heard even the argument that, but they are now selling on Zoom. They're not selling human to human. They are now selling on Zoom. So shouldn't they learn how to sell also on Zoom? That I don't know if you've heard that argument.
Yeah, it's fine. We can always justify something which is a constraint. Yeah, but so, during COVID, people did, learn how to work on Zoom. They learned how to sell on Zoom. They learned how to do cybersecurity on Zoom. But there is a time. It's really like saying, um, when you travel for like a long duration on a flight, you cannot step out and smell the fresh air. So now if you say, well, people can stay for like 4 hours without stepping out, why can't they spend the rest of their life indoors? Why should you need to step out? It's the same conversation. Just as you find this ridiculous, it's the same thing that people are experiencing somewhere else. That I think needs people to have a deeper understanding of how humans work. And humans are irrational people. We do not decide based on data and information and logic. Something as simple as imagine somebody gives you a $100 discount on something. Let's say you're buying something worth I don't know, $150, and somebody gives you $100 discount on that. That means a lot to you. But imagine you're buying an airplane and somebody gives you $100 discount. You would not even notice it. So money means different things to different people. We don't look at climate in the same way. You look at a certain temperature, you find somebody bundled up in warm clothes and somebody who's wearing shorts and going for a run. So human beings are different in multiple ways. Our experience of money, time, so many things is very different. So the moment you understand that, you would think about work in a very different way. Well, time is another great example. Think about, the just when you're waiting for, a doctor's appointment, time just seems to just drag. You get impatient when you're waiting for your cab to arrive. And let's imagine you're going to the airport and you're calling for an Uber. That time just doesn't seem to go through, even though it's the people say wait for 10 minutes and save money. People don't like to do that because the 10 minutes just seems forever, and you think that, my God, I think I'll miss my flight. So time means different things. So when you look at human beings in many different ways, we just need to acknowledge that it's not the same stuff that works for everyone.
Yes, you've reminded me of Dan Ariely's work on predictably irrational, right? And I think that's what we are. And of course, now I think with these machines, they are trying to predict our irrationality, right? That's what they're trying to do now, to keep us doom scrolling, to keep us on those screens, to keep us away from real human contact. So there is, of course, a science in terms of even codifying that, apparently. My favorite question, and this is not a trick question, by the way, but it may take a moment to like really settle or register, right? What is something you understand intellectually, Abhijit, in terms of AI and leadership, again in that field, but cannot yet see very clearly to act on yourself? Something you understand intellectually, but you've not really been able to feel it in your bones to act on it.
When you look at the difference between human time and AI time, that is like something that I'm still coming to grips with, because AI development is rapid. The capability between one particular model and the next release is sometimes a quantum shift. You sort of look at that. But when you look at human beings when they are upskilling themselves, uh, it doesn't happen like that. You never really. So, which is why we need to really rethink the way that we upskill people. How do you do it in a world where you are sending somebody a kind of a sending them to a workshop, and you're expecting a certain kind of a change? The workshop is done in a different context, and the change behavior is in a different context. So maybe really rethink, what is the right time to do it? What is the right way to do this? All of that becomes very important for people. So how do you learn to do that well? I think is the opportunity.
Thank you so much. This has been very insightful. I would recommend all the listeners and viewers to go and subscribe to Abhijit's amazing newsletter. Is it on your website and also on LinkedIn?
It's on LinkedIn. Yes, of course. You can subscribe to both my website, abhijitbhaduri.com, as well as on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Yes, it's an amazing one. And I still remember your sketch notes. I don't know if you're still doing sketch notes.
I'm doing those. Yes.
Those are wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Abhijit. And I look forward to seeing you maybe in New York.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Shabagi, for having me. Thank you very much.